So many homeowners living along the Mississippi River are left with expenses far over their heads, their homes ruined. Turns out the vast majority of them don't have flood insurance. Why is that? We looked into it.
My whole entire life, it's gone. I don't know what we're going to do.
Variations on a theme.
They said because it's a flood that they're not going to do. They're not going to help us.
We purchased a house last spring, and when we went to get the loan, we were told that we didn't need flood insurance, so we didn't purchase any. Now it's going to have just work a little bit more overtime and try and get a loan.
Fire station number 7 to Spike.
No insurance, big problem. Some homeowners don't know floods aren't covered by most insurance policies, and banks don't require it unless you finance a home in an area they define as a high risk. Bottom line, homeowners don't purchase it because they don't have to.
When a lender or an insurance agent says, you're outside the high risk area, you're just in the low to moderate risk area, so you're not required to have a flood insurance policy. People then hear that as saying, I don't need a flood insurance policy. That's part of the communication that we need to work with.
The federal government only requires it if you live in a so-called 100-year floodplain. That's a region with a 1% chance of being flooded within a year. The percentage of Midwest homes covered by flood insurance is in the single digits, despite 2 widespread and devastating floods in recent history.
Property that we're seeing being flooded in the Midwest right now, people can buy a flood insurance policy for as little as $10 to $15 a month.
$10 to $15 a month. Is that true? Steve Ellis is with Taxpayers for Common Sense. He also works on Mississippi River and coastal issues. Steve, is it, is that true? Is it that inexpensive to buy flood insurance?
Well, certainly if you're not in one of those high-risk areas, I mean, the rate does go down a bit in these sort of residual risk areas that are protected by a levee or some other structure. And people are learning that a levee is not a promise that you'll never flood. It just is protection from flooding from certain levels.
Well, let's talk about some of these more risky areas. Should banks do a better job of informing people of the risk? Or does the responsibility ultimately rest with the home buyers to know the environment, know where they're buying their homes, know the risks of that land, of that property, and make maybe a better informed decision?
Well, certainly there is a bit of a buyer beware that you need to know your property, whether it's the flood risk or anything else that's going on there. And then secondly, though, I do think that the industry as a whole and your not just your mortgage lender, but also your insurance agent should be doing a better job of informing you, because it's generally just a policy rider that goes on your normal or your normal homeowner's insurance policy. I
keep hearing that folks should make an informed decision, and I get that, but I also hear that the maps used to determine the risk areas, the high flood-prone areas, that those maps are outdated. Is that true?
Well, the maps are certainly outdated, and they are trying to update those, and those are things that need to be going forward. But you still can be making informed decisions. They don't change that dramatically. And really, in a lot of communities, people are trying to either get a levee or some form of protection so that you're outside the 100-year floodplain and you don't actually have to buy flood insurance. And so what we've done in a lot of areas is we've sort of dumbed down the flood protection to that 100-year level, which is clearly not adequate so that people don't have to buy flood insurance.
Well, let's take a big step back here. Let's go back to 1993, and I'm wondering about the lessons that were learned and taken to heart. Have a listen to, this is Adolphus Bush of the famed Bush family. He is with the Great Rivers Habitat Alliance, and then I've got a question for you, Steve.
Sure.
After the 93 flood, we were told, of course, that there would be no more levees, no more projects, no more development in the floodplains because everyone had learned their lesson. And that went on for a few years. But, of course, people soon forgot again, and the development started.
So, Steve, try this as a proposition. We are putting more communities and more homes at risk because we are building more and more levees, and in the process, creating a greater risk of even more spectacular flooding.
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, essentially what we are doing is, and it's not just the federal government and building the levees, it's also communities that are zoning and allowing development in these high-risk areas. And Mr. Bush is absolutely correct in the fact that the half-life of a natural disaster is very brief. And so the time to take advantage and learn the lessons and to try to make strong systematic changes are right now, because it's costing us every one of these floods, not just the individual cost and the homeowner's cost, but also the federal government cost.
So, Steve, if I'm flooded out right now, but my home is not a total loss, how easy or difficult will it be for me now to get flood insurance for a home that has been severely damaged by a flood?
Well, I mean, you can get flood insurance pretty much right away, but it isn't going to take effect for a disaster that has already occurred.
Sure.
Now, what can happen though is that if a community is not part of the flood insurance program, they can opt in even after the disaster, which will then allow you to get disaster payments. And so Congress just approved the House just approved $2.7 billion to send out to the Midwest, and so some of that money would be able to trickle through.
Terrific. All right, Steve Ellis with us this evening. Steve, great to talk to you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, and if you would like to help victims of the flooding in the Midwest, please go to our Impact Your World webpage, where you will find links to several organizations that are stepping in to offer some assistance. That's at CNN.com/impact.